The cardboard box felt heavier than it should have as I climbed the stairs to apartment 3B, each step echoing my father's parting words about keeping things simple and temporary. That's exactly what I wanted, a month-long sublet while I figured out my next career move. Nothing complicated, nothing that would challenge the carefully ordered life I'd built around my family's expectations. I'd specifically chosen this arrangement because it was short-term, clean, and safe from the kind of messy emotional entanglements that my upbringing had taught me to avoid. Before I could knock, the door swung open to reveal a man about my age with warm brown eyes and an easy smile that immediately put me off balance. "You must be Adam," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Michael. Welcome to our temporary home." His handshake lingered just a moment longer than necessary, and something about his genuine warmth made my chest tighten in a way I couldn't quite name. The apartment was filled with natural light, colorful artwork on the walls, and plants that actually looked healthy. Everything felt alive in a way that contrasted sharply with the sterile efficiency I was used to. "Thanks for letting me crash here," I managed, trying to ignore how his laugh seemed to fill the entire space. "I really just need somewhere quiet to figure things out." "Of course," Michael replied, helping me with my box. "Though I have to warn you, I'm not great at keeping quiet. I tend to talk too much, especially when I'm working on designs." As he led me to my room, chattering easily about house rules and shared spaces, I found myself watching the way he moved, the animated gestures he made when he spoke. Something felt different here, unsettling in a way that made my carefully constructed walls feel suddenly fragile. If you're enjoying this story, drop a heart in the comments below. My room was simple but comfortable, a bed, desk, and window overlooking the courtyard where children played in the evenings. As I unpacked my few belongings, I could hear Michael moving around the apartment, the soft sounds of someone completely at ease in their own space. The normalcy of it felt foreign after months of hotel rooms and temporary arrangements. That first evening, he knocked gently on my door. "Hey, I'm making dinner. Nothing fancy, just pasta. You're welcome to join if you want." The invitation was casual, but something in his tone suggested he genuinely hoped I'd say yes. I found myself in a kitchen that looked actually lived in, with herbs growing on the windowsill and cookbooks with worn spines. Michael moved with practiced ease, talking as he cooked about his work as a graphic designer for a small firm downtown. His hands were expressive when he spoke, and I noticed the way his eyes lit up when he described a project he was particularly proud of. "What about you?" he asked, setting down plates of perfectly prepared carbonara. "What brings you to the temporary living situation?" I gave him the rehearsed answer about work transitions and keeping things simple, but he listened with the kind of attention that made me feel like my words actually mattered. When I mentioned my background in accounting, he didn't make jokes about numbers being boring. Instead, he asked thoughtful questions about what I enjoyed about the work, seeming genuinely interested in understanding. Over the following days, we fell into an easy rhythm. Michael would often work from home, his laptop set up at the dining table, and I'd catch glimpses of the colorful designs flowing across the screen. He had a way of greeting me each morning that felt neither intrusive nor distant, just warmly present. "Coffee's fresh," he'd say, not looking up from his work, but somehow conveying that he'd made extra specifically for me. I began looking forward to our evening conversations. He'd ask about my day with genuine curiosity, and somehow I found myself sharing more than I usually did with anyone. He had this way of listening that made me feel heard without judgment. When he talked about his own life, his close friendships, his volunteer work at a local community center, his family who lived across the country, I was struck by how openly he moved through the world. There was something about Michael's authenticity that both drew me in and made me uncomfortable. He seemed to live without the careful barriers I'd spent years constructing. When he laughed, it was unguarded. When he disagreed with something on the news, he expressed his opinions with passionate conviction. Watching him exist so naturally in his own skin made me realize how much energy I spent maintaining my careful composure. The third week brought a shift I couldn't ignore. Michael's presence had become the highlight of my days, and I found myself timing my schedule around his. When I heard his key in the door each evening, something in my chest would lift in a way that felt both natural and terrifying. I'd catch myself watching him as he worked on his laptop, admiring the way his brow furrowed in concentration, the graceful movement of his hands across the keyboard. One evening, we were preparing dinner together, a routine that had somehow become sacred to me. Michael was telling me about a difficult client, his voice animated with frustration and humor when he suddenly laughed at his own story. The sound was so genuine, so unguarded, that I felt something crack open inside me. I realized I was staring at him with an intensity that made my cheeks burn, and when he caught my eye, I quickly looked away. "You okay?" he asked, his voice gentle with concern. "Fine," I managed, but my hands were shaking as I chopped vegetables. Nothing about this was fine. Everything I'd been taught about appropriate feelings, about the natural order of relationships, was crumbling around me. I was falling for my male roommate, and the realization was both exhilarating and devastating. That night, lying in bed, I couldn't escape the truth anymore. I was attracted to Michael in ways that went far beyond friendship or admiration. I thought about his smile, the way he'd touched my shoulder briefly when making a point during our conversation, the comfortable silences we shared. My body responded to these memories in ways that made my religious upbringing scream in protest. The internal war was exhausting. Everything my family had taught me, every sermon I'd heard, every cultural message I'd absorbed told me these feelings were wrong, dangerous, sinful. But when I was with Michael, when I saw his kindness and integrity, when I felt the peace his presence brought me, those learned voices seemed hollow and distant. I began noticing things about him that made my heart race. The way he hummed while making coffee in the morning. How he always asked about my day with genuine interest. The respect he showed everyone, from the elderly woman next door to the delivery driver. Michael lived with a moral compass that seemed more authentic than anything I'd learned in Sunday school. Days blurred together as I wrestled with these revelations. I found myself creating excuses to spend time with him, suggesting we watch movies together, offering to help with his design projects even though I knew nothing about graphic design. He never seemed to mind my constant presence, welcoming my company with the same warmth he showed everyone. One afternoon, while Michael was explaining a logo concept he was developing, I caught myself studying his face with an intensity that felt dangerous. When he looked up and smiled at me, asking if I understood his creative process, I felt my world tilt. This wasn't just attraction. I was falling in love with him, and the magnitude of that realization left me breathless. The beliefs I'd carried my entire life were at war with the undeniable truth of my feelings. I'd been taught that love was only valid between a man and a woman, that anything else was a deviation from God's plan. But being with Michael felt like the most natural thing in the world. His presence brought out parts of me I'd never known existed, a capacity for joy, for genuine connection, for authentic living. I started questioning everything. If these feelings were wrong, why did they feel so right? If Michael was leading me astray, why did his influence make me want to be a better person? The cognitive dissonance was overwhelming, but buried beneath my fear was something else. Hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, everything I'd been taught about love was incomplete. As the days passed, I realized I was at a crossroads. I could continue living according to others' expectations, or I could explore what my heart was trying to tell me. Michael had shown me a different way of being in the world, one based on authenticity rather than performance. The question was whether I had the courage to follow that path. The opportunity for that deeper conversation came 3 nights later, when I found Michael sitting on the couch with his laptop, working on a late project. The apartment felt different in the evening light, more intimate somehow, and I gathered the courage to sit beside him instead of retreating to my room as I usually did. "Long day?" I asked, noting the slight tension in his shoulders. He saved his work and closed the laptop, turning to face me with that warm smile that had become so familiar yet still made my heart skip. "Not too bad. Just trying to finish up a logo design for a nonprofit downtown. They help LGBTQ+ youth find safe housing." I felt my chest tighten at the mention, but something in his tone made me want to understand rather than shut down. "That must be meaningful work." "It is," he said, his expression growing thoughtful. "A lot of these kids get kicked out of their homes just for being who they are. The organization tries to bridge that gap, help families heal when possible." He paused, studying my face. I was lucky. My family took time to understand, but they came around. Not everyone gets that chance. The weight of his words settled between us, and I found myself thinking about my own family, about the certainty in their voices when they spoke about people like Michael. "How did you? I mean, when did you know?" The question tumbled out before I could stop it. Michael's eyes softened with understanding. "I think part of me always knew, but I spent years trying to convince myself otherwise. I dated women, threw myself into activities that felt normal, even considered the seminary at one point. He laughed quietly. But you can't run from yourself forever. The pretending was exhausting. What changed? I whispered, my voice barely audible. I met someone, he said simply. Not romantically, just a friend who lived authentically without apology. Watching him exist in the world with such peace made me realize that all my fear and shame weren't protecting me. They were just keeping me from living. He shifted closer, and I felt the warmth of his presence. I realized that love isn't something to be ashamed of, regardless of who you find it with. My throat felt tight. My family would say that's wrong, that it's a choice, a failing. What do you think? He asked gently, not pushing but offering space for my own truth. I stared at my hands, feeling the weight of a lifetime of conditioning warring with the undeniable reality of what I felt sitting next to him. I think I've been afraid of my own heart for so long that I forgot what it was trying to tell me. The admission hung in the air between us, vulnerable and terrifying. Michael reached out, his fingers brushing against mine. And what is it telling you now? The simple touch sent electricity through me, and I looked up to meet his eyes. In them, I saw understanding, patience, and something deeper that made my breath catch. It's telling me that everything I thought I knew about love might be wrong. That's what I feel when I'm with you. I swallowed hard. It doesn't feel broken or shameful. It feels like coming home. The silence stretched between us, filled with unspoken recognition. Michael's hand covered mine completely now, and I didn't pull away. Adam, he said softly, there's something I need to tell you. These past few weeks, getting to know you, watching you discover yourself, I've developed feelings for you too. I didn't want to say anything because I could see you were working through so much, but you have. The words came out breathless, hopeful. How could I not? You're kind, thoughtful, and watching you question everything you've been taught with such courage. It's beautiful. His thumb traced across my knuckles. But I also know this is complicated for you. I don't want to pressure you into anything you're not ready for. I felt tears prick my eyes, overwhelmed by the gentleness in his voice, the way he held space for my struggle without judgment. I'm terrified, I admitted, but I'm also tired of being afraid of who I might be. You make me want to be brave. You're already braver than you know, he said. Just by being here, by questioning, by being open to possibility, that takes incredible courage. As we sat there, hands intertwined, I felt something shift inside me. The rigid walls I'd built around my heart began to crumble, replaced by something warmer and more authentic. For the first time in my life, I was facing the truth of who I was, and it felt like breathing after holding my breath for decades. The month was nearly over, and the thought of leaving this apartment, leaving him, felt unbearable. But more than that, the thought of returning to my old life, pretending these feelings didn't exist, felt impossible. I was falling in love with Michael, and for the first time, I was ready to embrace what that meant. I lay awake that entire night, staring at the ceiling as my mind churned through 27 years of everything I'd been taught to believe. The apartment was quiet except for the soft sounds of Michael's breathing from the next room, and even that simple sound made my chest tighten with emotions I was finally ready to name. Love. I was in love with him, and the realization no longer felt like a crisis. It felt like coming alive. Every fear that had kept me trapped seemed smaller in the darkness. The disapproval of my family, the judgment from my community, the comfortable lies I'd told myself about who I was supposed to be, none of it mattered when I thought about Michael's laugh, or the way he listened to me like my thoughts actually mattered, or how safe I felt in his presence. For the first time in my life, I understood what people meant when they talked about love being worth fighting for. I thought about my father's stern lectures about traditional values, my mother's worried glances whenever the topic of my dating life came up, the pressure I'd felt to find the right woman and settle down into the life they'd mapped out for me. But that life had never felt real, never felt like mine. It was a costume I'd worn to make other people comfortable, and I was exhausted from pretending it fit. The morning light filtered through my bedroom window, and I could hear Michael moving around in the kitchen, probably making that terrible instant coffee he somehow preferred to the expensive stuff I'd bought. 3 more days. That's all the time we had left in this arrangement. And then what? I'd pack my things, find another place, and spend the rest of my life wondering what might have happened if I'd been brave enough to be honest. The thought made me feel sick. I'd spent so many years being the person everyone expected me to be, following rules that had never made sense to me, trying to force myself into a mold that had never been the right shape. But Michael had shown me something different. He lived authentically, loved openly, and treated his sexuality not as something to hide from, but as a beautiful part of who he was. I could hear him humming in the kitchen, probably that song he'd been playing on repeat all week, and the sound made me smile despite my exhaustion. He hummed when he was happy, sang in the shower when he thought I couldn't hear, and got this little crease between his eyebrows when he was concentrating on his design work. I'd memorized these details without even realizing it, collecting pieces of him like treasures. The fear was still there, lurking in the corners of my mind, but it felt different now. Smaller, more manageable. Because the alternative, walking away from him, from the person I was becoming, felt impossible. I'd gotten a taste of what it felt like to be authentic, to feel genuine connection, and I couldn't go back to the hollow existence I'd been living before. I thought about calling my sister, the one person in my family who might understand, but realized I wasn't ready for that conversation yet. This was about me and Michael, about the choice I needed to make about my own life. The rest of the world could wait. Rising from bed, I walked to my window and looked out at the city waking up. People heading to work, living their lives, most of them probably taking for granted the freedom to love who they chose. I wanted that freedom too. I wanted the courage to reach for happiness instead of hiding from it. The smell of coffee, terrible instant coffee that I'd probably learned to love, drifted from the kitchen, and I heard Michael call my name. My heart jumped the way it always did when he said my name, and I finally understood that this feeling wasn't something to fear or fight. It was something to embrace. 3 more days in this apartment, but maybe that didn't have to be the end. Maybe it could be the beginning of something real, something honest, something worth the risk of disappointing people who'd never really seen me anyway. The morning light filtered through the apartment windows as I found Michael in the kitchen, already brewing coffee. My hands trembled slightly as I approached him, the weight of my sleepless night and newfound clarity making every step feel monumental. He looked up with that familiar warm smile, but I could see concern in his eyes as he took in my appearance. "Adam, you look like you didn't sleep at all," he said softly, reaching for a second mug. "Are you okay?" I stood there for a moment, watching him pour the coffee with the same gentle care he showed in everything he did. This man who had become my entire world in just a few weeks, who had shown me what it meant to live authentically without even trying. The words I'd rehearsed all night suddenly felt inadequate. "Michael, I need to tell you something," I began, my voice barely above a whisper. "These past few weeks with you, they've changed everything for me." He set down the coffee pot and turned to face me fully, his expression patient and encouraging. I took a shaky breath, knowing there was no going back from what I was about to say. "I've spent my entire life trying to be what everyone else wanted me to be," I continued, the words gaining strength as they poured out. "I've hidden behind rules and expectations and fear, convinced that was the only way to live. But being here with you, seeing how you approach the world with such honesty and kindness, you've shown me what it means to be truly alive." Michael's eyes widened slightly, and I saw him take a small step closer. The kitchen felt charged with electricity as I gathered the courage for what came next. "I'm in love with you," I said, the words hanging in the air between us. I know how that sounds. I know my background and everything I've said about relationships. But Michael, you've helped me discover who I really am. You've shown me that love isn't something to fear or hide from. It's something beautiful and real and worth everything. For a moment, the silence stretched between us, and I felt my heart hammering against my ribs. Then Michael's face broke into the most radiant smile I'd ever seen. "Adam," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I've been hoping you'd say that. I've been falling for you too, but I didn't want to pressure you or make you feel like you had to choose between your beliefs and your feelings. I wanted you to find your own way to this truth." He reached out and took my hands in his touch sending warmth through my entire being. "I love you too," he said simply, "and I'm so proud of you for being brave enough to embrace who you are." The tears in my eyes weren't from sadness anymore, but from overwhelming relief and joy. For the first time in my life, I felt completely seen and accepted for who I truly was. "I don't want to leave when the month ends," I whispered, afraid to hope but needing to say it. Michael's smile was radiant. "I was hoping you'd say that. I've been dreading next week, thinking you'd walk away and I'd never see you again." We talked until dawn, sharing dreams and fears, planning a future I'd never imagined possible. When morning came, I called my landlord and extended my lease indefinitely. It felt like the first decision I had made purely for myself. The following weeks brought challenges. I had difficult conversations with my family, lost some friendships, and faced moments of doubt. But Michael stood beside me through it all, patient and understanding, never pushing but always supporting. 3 months later, we officially moved in together, not as roommates but as partners. I found a new job in the city, started making friends who accepted me completely, and slowly built the authentic life I'd always been too afraid to want. Looking back, I realized that month changed everything. Michael didn't just help me discover who I was. He showed me that love isn't something to fear or hide from. It's something to embrace, celebrate, and fight for. And I'd never been happier to be exactly who I was meant to be.